Thank you for joining us for Make It Plain. We're going to have a wonderful conversation this evening about the COVID-19 vaccine. I'm Alan Younger. I'm a member of the Social Action Committee of the Alpha Pi Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha, and we are very pleased to partner with the Maya Angelou Center for Health Equity. For several months, several people in the community, as well as medical experts, have gotten together to talk about COVID-19, how it's affecting our community. We're talking about prevention and then also treatment. This conversation is our second town hall discussion where we're talking about COVID-19. And tonight's conversation will focus on a vaccine. As you know, a vaccine is in development, and a lot of people have concerns, legitimate concerns about vaccine. So we're going to have a wonderful conversation. But before we do, I want to introduce you to Dr. Allison Caban-Holt. She is a member of, or an employee of, the Maya Angelou Center for Health Equity.
Hello, I'd like to say thank you to Alan Younger for moderating this session. My name is Allison Caban-Holt, and I'm the Associate Director of the Maya Angelou Center for Health Equity. I bring you greetings from our director, Dr. Goldie Bird, and the rest of our team. To tell you a little bit about the center, it was named in honor of the late Dr. Maya Angelou, who was a Reynolds Professor of American Studies at Wake Forest University. And we are an inclusive and cross-disciplinary organization within the Wake Forest School of Medicine. Since its creation in 2002, the Maya Angelou Center for Health Equity has developed programs to improve health outcomes for all with an intentional focus on nurturing efforts for underserved groups. The center addresses health equity by reducing patient and caregiver burden in underserved groups through extensive outreach and education, translational research in areas of health disparities, community engagement and education, and training of underrepresented individuals who will contribute to the biomedical and clinical workforce. Our mission is multifold and supports the health of communities by building and nurturing mutually beneficial relationships, respecting and honoring communities as experts and equal partners, engaging education and empowering communities, cultivating health and equity in leadership, creating a culture of transparency and fairness in research, promoting health equity advocacy and policy change. Our research initiatives include the READY study that is looking at the genetics that may influence Alzheimer's disease susceptibility in African Americans, the North Carolina Brain Health Registry that engages in community outreach for groups that are underrepresented in research to become involved in brain health research, Native Pathways to Health, which is seeking to better understand the needs, assets, and priorities of American Indian populations in North Carolina, the Impacts Initiative that looks at how to manage pain among cancer treatment survivors. Other programs at the Maya Angelou Center include the Integrating Special Populations Program that encourages research participation by individuals from underrepresented groups, such as people of color, the North Carolina American Indian Health Board, which promotes quality healthcare and healthy lifestyles within American Indian communities through research, education, and advocacy to eliminate health disparities for American Indian communities in North Carolina, and biomedical pipeline programs such as MedCats and AIMS that provide biomedical science enrichment experiences for American Indian students. Our outreach initiatives include the Triad Pastors Network, which includes 109 African American pastors committed to improving the health and well-being of African American congregations in the Triad region and across the state of North Carolina, many of whom may be on this session today. And our COVID-19 outreach, which has included distributing masks as part of the Mask the City effort here in Winston-Salem. You'll hear more about these efforts from Dr. Allison Matthews, who's one of the panelists today. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the need for a focus on health equity due to the way in which we've become aware that race has a significant bearing on health outcomes of individuals with the virus. This issue has increased our efforts to help meet the needs of communities that have been disproportionately affected by COVID. The Maya Angelou Center is standing as a partner with these communities to be a source of reliable information and guidance on best practices on COVID safety. This town hall meeting is one of the ways for us to provide information and a safe place to share our feelings and impressions about the COVID pandemic. We must have accurate and up-to-date information so that we can make informed decisions about the ways to proceed. We are inspired by the words of Dr. Angelou. If it is true that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, isn't it also true a society is only as healthy as its sickest citizen and only as wealthy as its most deprived? It is on us to keep one another strong at this time. I thank you for joining this conversation on COVID-19 safety. Please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Caban-Holtz. We really appreciate all the great work that the Maya Angelou Center for Health Equity is doing in our community. It benefits me and it benefits many other people because you are doing what you do. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
You mentioned Dr. Allison Matthews. She's one of our panelists, so I'm happy to ask her to introduce herself better than I could myself.
Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Allison Matthews. I'm the Associate Director of a program at Wake Forest Baptist Health called Integrating Special Populations. And my background is as a sociologist. And so the biggest kind of thing that you could know about the work that I do is trying to make sure that Black, Latinx, and underrepresented groups have access to research and understand how to protect themselves and understand what research is going on and increasing access to that research. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. I'm so glad that you are as well. I'd also like to have everyone meet Dr. Shakira Causey.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Shakira Causey, and I'm a postdoctoral research scientist in the psychiatry department at Duke University School of Medicine. And I am trained as a developmental scientist, and my research is primarily seeking to understand how contextual factors impact health outcomes in families and communities of color, and also making sure that those individuals are participating in necessary research to make sure that their health outcomes are better developmentally and clinically, but also to make sure that they are represented in scientific research to decrease health inequities that are pervasive in communities of color.
Well,
and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you very much. We're really excited that you're here as well, and we're excited about the great work that you do. I'd also like to introduce Dr. John Sanders, or have him introduce himself, rather.
Thank you, Alan. I'm John Sanders. I'm an infectious disease physician and the chief of infectious diseases here at Wake Forest Baptist Health. It's a great honor to be here. I have really enjoyed working with several of the panelists on this panel tonight as we've explored the way to study COVID-19 and to make sure that research and care are available to all members of our community. And I'm especially interested in talking about our activities in vaccine research tonight. I serve as the principal investigator for the Wake Forest site for the Moderna vaccine, and I'm involved in several of the other vaccine studies. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, and it's been a pleasure working with you since June on this committee. So thank you for joining us tonight. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Julia Nassim.
Thank you, Mr. Younger. I'm Julia Nassim. I'm one of the senior fellows from the infectious disease department here at Wake Forest. I'm Argentinian, born, raised, and trained. And my interest was mainly clinical until COVID hit, and now I'm participating in the COVID vaccine trial with the Moderna trial at Wake Forest with Dr. Sanders too. And I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us. We're really excited to have you. I'm pleased to announce that Daisy Dewey-Gatt is a friend and former coworker of one of my sisters. So I'm going to let her introduce herself beyond that.
That's great. Thanks, Alan. And thank you for inviting me to this esteemed panel. My name is Daisy Dewey Scott, and I'm the Vice President of Clinical Operations at Javara Research. My team is responsible for the delivery of this very, very important work to the patients and working alongside the physicians in delivering this important vaccine work. We work closely with Dr. Sanders and his team, and I have a defined interest in being able to provide and offer clinical trials to underserved populations. From an educational perspective, I have a master's in public health and international health and development, and have spent a lot of my time in Latin America. So it's very much a joy to be a part of this panel.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad that you are a part of this panel. And lastly, let me introduce Dr. Richard Moya, who happens to be a fellow Steeler, and we're happy that we're 4-0 for the first time in a long time. But also, he's a participant in the vaccine study and trial.
Hi, yes. Thank you for bringing me on here. In fact, I've gotten 2 doses of the vaccine. I'm interested in helping spread awareness about the vaccine and why it's important. I'm also a sociologist at Winston-Salem State. I teach research methods, and our program also has a public health minor. But I'm going to talk today mostly about my experience, why I took the vaccine and am willing to take it, and encouraging others to, participate in trials as they become available.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. So here's what we're going to do now. We've got a variety of questions that I'm going to ask our panelists. However, we want you to be able to ask questions as well. So whether you're using the chat feature in YouTube or Facebook, that's certainly appropriate. However, we're also going to have a 30-minute period where you can ask your questions, submit them in the chat, and I'll read them to our panelists. So the first question is, what are different types of vaccines that are being developed for COVID-19? How many different studies of the vaccine are underway? I'm going to pose this question to Dr. Sanders first.
So Alan, it's a great question, and I'm going to reference a New York Times article from this week, because the numbers are changing fast enough that really it takes a group like the New York Times to keep up with it. As of this week, there are more than 150 vaccines worldwide being developed and being tested. 29 of those vaccines have moved from the laboratory or animal studies into human studies, and that's worldwide. Here in the United States, it's smaller. There are only a handful that have made it through those stages, but at least 11 vaccines are in late-stage efficacy studies, phase 3 studies worldwide, to see if they might be effective vaccine.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anybody else who wants to add to that, or should we move on to the next question?
I think a lot of times people ask, why are there so many different vaccines that are being developed? And I think that can be kind of confusing. Dr. Sanders, can you help us understand why there's so many different vaccines being created?
Yes. Dr. Matthews, you always ask great questions. Thank you. Thank you for that follow-up. So, there are a number of different ways to develop an effective vaccine. The classic way to make a vaccine is to identify the germ and then to kill it, to make sure that the germ is not able to infect somebody, but to give that killed germ in a shot or orally to trigger the immune system. And there are some vaccines that are using exactly that approach, taking the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the virus that causes COVID-19, inactivating it or killing it and giving it that way. But there are more modern, fancier ways to provide a safe, effective vaccine. And so part of the reason there are so many vaccines being tested is because a number of these new techniques are being utilized. And that includes just taking pieces of the vaccine and combining it with an immune booster we call an adjuvant. It includes taking some genes, some DNA or RNA that can tell our body to make proteins that look like the virus, but are not the virus, is only a piece of the virus, so that we get a vaccine that it has some of these genetic pieces of genetic material that trick the immune system into thinking that there are proteins from the virus there. Because there's just so many different ways to make vaccines, different approaches to make the vaccines, it has led to a bunch of different vaccines being tried. The other thing that comes into play is that there are a lot of groups very interested in coming up with an effective vaccine. So we have a number of different drug companies competing to come up with an effective vaccine, as well as hundreds of universities and research centers all over the world trying to come up with a vaccine using one of these different approaches.
Thank you very much. Certainly appreciate all of that helpful information. My next question is for Dr. Causey. What are the considerations that we need to take into account for African American and Latinx communities to build trust around COVID-19 vaccines? Should I tell her?
Yes.
Dr. Causey, you may be muted.
I just noticed that I'm on mute. I apologize for that.
No problem.
I think one of the important key elements that was mentioned earlier is the need for transparency. So as scientists, whether you're a researcher or a medical practitioner, I think it's going to be important as we try to recruit communities of color to not labor them with altruistic types of rhetoric when history shows that there is this pervasive evidence of valid medical distrust, right? In past research studies where they have oftentimes been taken advantage of or abused in the advancement of scientific research. So I think it's our job to be transparent and try to rebuild trust and rapport with these individuals. And I think that takes partnering with individuals who are already invested in the community and who are already stakeholders who are doing this community-based participatory research like the Maya Angelou Center for Health Equity, so that these individuals really feel and believe that their participation is not only necessary, but important for organizations who have been there over the course of time, even prior to COVID-19. So there really is this sense of a symbiotic relationship that exists in not only their welfare in developing an effective vaccine, but also in just the general well-being of the community itself. So I think the transparency is what's going to be key to getting the amount of representation needed to understand if the vaccine is effective in these particular populations.
Thank you very much. Certainly appreciate that. My next question is for Dr. Nassim.
Okay.
What is the difference between the different phases of a clinical trial?
Well, when you are going to do something in humans, first it goes with animal, and then it goes with 3 different trials, like type 1, type 2, and type 3. Type 1 is usually like 20 to 50 people. Imagine like the amount of people you will have in your birthday party or your English class. And it's mainly about like safety and dosing too. Is how much vaccine do we need to give you? How much dosing we need to give you? It is safe. If that is approved, then you go to stage 2, and that is like a couple of hundred individuals. It's also like safety And then now we go with the stage 3, which is like a small city. It's about 30,000 individuals. It's what most of the COVID vaccines are doing. And this is efficacy, means does it work? And we also, of course, we are looking at safety as well, but every different phase of the trial have different goals. We're now in the phase 3 for the COVID vaccine. And once it's approved, then we can even discuss about what we call a phase 4, which is once the vaccine is already on the market to make sure that it continues to be safe. But before you put it in the pharmacies, you need to test it in animals, and then you need to go to stage 1, 2, and 3, which is exactly what we're doing right now.
Thank you very much. I'd like to know if any of you would like to chime in on either of the last 2 questions. They both speak to trust.
I would like to chime in. I think it's important, just going back to what Dr. Causey was talking about, transparency is key. And I think that Dr. Nassim, just by the mere fact of breaking down how we're actually, how researchers are developing these vaccines in a way that is following the protocol that is really designed to protect participants and to not put anybody in undue harm until we know more about the intervention, whether it be a vaccine or medication or something like that. I think that's important for us to be able to communicate that information to the community in a way that is easy to understand. A lot of times the materials that go out are in this legal jargon. It's hard for people to understand really what the materials are, what the science is. And I think also a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the research that's been done on the vaccines that are being developed has been, scientists have been working on this technology for the past 10 years. And so it's just now becoming a part of common conversation, but we have this concern that everything is being rushed all of a sudden, and then all of a sudden we're having this vaccine and it's developed out of thin air, but it's not really. It's really being developed from years and years of work and expertise, and then now making a concerted effort to make sure that people of color in particular are represented in the studies, so that we don't repeat the past mistakes, right? And so I think there's a lot of fear right now that we are repeating past mistakes of exploiting communities of color, when in actuality, I would say that this is actually the opposite of that, and trying to make a concerted effort to do things in a way that partners with community and make sure that people of color are represented.
Very well said. So here's a question that has been asked by a lot of different people, and I also wonder about, and that is, how soon are we going to have a vaccine? Is there any likelihood that we'll have a vaccine now in flu season that can be more widely available? This is available to anybody who dares to answer this question.
Alan, I'll dare to answer it. How's that? And then I'll turn it over to the physicians on the line. I think just to echo what Allison was saying, as well as what Dr. Nassim was saying. So I'm going to jump back to the drug development process. I think what's important to know as we're going through the different phases of drug development, even though it feels like we're moving at a really fast pace, and many have heard the term warp speed, and it feels like warp speed, there's really there's a lot of rigidity in the drug development process, and there's steps that just can't be skipped. And so when we're going from that phase 1 where we're getting our dose, then we're advancing and we're increasing into that phase 2 where we're really continuing to look at safety and how well the medicine works. I think it's really important for communities to understand that there's a stopping point in each of those levels where we take a look at the data, we take a look at the safety material, we take a look at, did we get the study design right? Because as we start to increase and we go through the different phases of drug development, we start to expand our patient populations. And those patient populations are my family, your neighbors, and we need to make sure that we do get it right. So, so the question relative, do we feel like we'll have a vaccine prior to flu season? Flu season's fast approaching, and I think it's safe to say that that we are going through those approval levels, and and for those of us that are in the trenches, we're not going to risk patient safety. It's up to the companies to review the data and to submit to the agency and to take a look at the data. However, I think it would be it's probably highly unlikely that we'll have something before influenza season. And I think it's just due to the rigor that we have within our approval process with the FDA.
I would like to use a phrase that I use with my patients when they're hospitalized. I said, not a day too late, not a day too soon. Everyone is like focusing on when are we going to have the vaccine? It's going to be now, it's going to be in December, it's going to be in January. The short answer is we'll have a vaccine when it's safe, when it's efficacious, and when we're sure that we're giving to you, it's something that is not going to make you sick and it's going to prevent you from having COVID. When is that going to happen? As soon as we can. We're cautiously optimistic, but I don't think that anyone will feel comfortable in giving you an exact date. But we're working really hard. One of the concerns is that we're like burning stages, and usually a vaccine development that takes like 4 to 10 years, and we're thinking that the COVID vaccine will be in less than 1 year. So one of the things that I always say to my patients when they ask me about that is, imagine that you need to build a house, right? But instead of like giving you what will take like 6 months, I give you like 2 weeks. So you will hire like a lot of workers. They will work 24/7. They will work every day. You will make sure that you have someone in the town hall making sure that you have the construction permit, and you will have like a pre-assembling the furniture that you just bought in the store before the house is even painted. And that's exactly what the vaccine is doing. There's like a lot of things happening at the same time, but it's exactly what we're supposed to do because we want to have a safe and efficacious vaccine fast without burning stages.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. So this question is for Dr. Richard Moya, who is currently in a vaccine trial. So how do you feel with regard to safety?
Thank you for that question. I feel the vaccines are extremely safe so far. They're testing it to make sure that it is safe. They take a lot of precautions as far as doing blood work before a vaccine is administered, during the asking a lot of screening questions, and checking after the vaccine is administered. Though you have to sit there for a while. You've got to do a lot of paperwork, and they check on you regularly. I feel like the proper precautions are being followed. And remember, if we do get if you are able to sign up for a trial and you do participate in the vaccine, if it works, you're making not just yourself safer, but also the people in your household and the people in your community safer, because you're going to be less likely to transmit the virus to them if you do happen to come in contact with somebody that does have the virus.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I certainly appreciate that.
So, Alan,
Yes, sir.
could I follow up
Please
on that just briefly? And because I would just like to thank Dr. Moya for being a volunteer, for being a participant. We really appreciate that, sir. And one of the things that I do frequently as we're enrolling volunteers into especially these vaccine studies is ask them why they chose to enroll. And very frequently the answer is, well, because I'm scared of COVID and I want the vaccine. And that's not usually really the right answer, because we can't promise that the vaccine is going to be effective. But the other day, in enrolling a Black man into the study, and I asked him the same question, and he said, "This is my civic duty. I'm trying to look out for my friends and family and community to see if this works." And I thought that was the perfect answer. Dr. Moya, I thought your answer was very consistent with that, and I just wanted to say thank you.
I want to echo that thank you. Also, I want to ask Dr. Nassim, so how important is trust, building trust in the Latinx community?
Well, I think it's super important now more than ever. It's like one of the things that we're discussing is the percentage in North Carolina, the African Americans represent 20% of the population and 10% of Latinx. Now, when you look at the amount of people who have volunteered at Wake Forest, it's 5% are African Americans and 1% are like Latins, which means that the people who get the most COVID, the African Americans and the Latins, the people who will potentially benefit the most from the vaccine, are not being participating in a proportion that affect in a good proportion that will affect the vaccine. So it's extremely important that we talk, that we're transparent, that basically that we do these town halls and we communicate to people and said, we need you. We need you to come to the research. You can be part of the change. You can have a civic duty that we need to address. We have the opportunity to be part of the research, and we understand why basically there is a lot of concern and there is like a lot of mistrust, and that's exactly why we're here today, to talk and be transparent and show you basically I don't think we have nothing to hide.
Thank you very much. So is the vaccine just for adults? Whoever wants to answer that can.
Alan, if you don't mind, I'll take a crack at that and say right now the clinical trials that are underway are just for adults. There is discussion about adding a pediatric arm to a number of these studies, but right now that has, in the United States, none of the studies that are underway involve children. I expect that sometime in the future we will see some of the studies extend out into those sort of special populations under the age of 18 and maybe even for pregnant women.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. So this question is for whoever wants to contribute to the answer. What are the things that people should consider when making decisions about whether or not to participate in a vaccine trial?
Alan, I can answer that.
Please do.
I think what's important for patients when they're considering to be in a vaccine trial is to understand what the informed consent is. Understand what is going to be the requirements of the study. What is the duration? For some of these vaccine trials, it's a commitment. It's a commitment for the patient. These patients, when they come in, they're not simply just going to receive one vaccine and go home. They're going to be followed for 2 years. We're going to follow for their own patient safety. And it's important for them to understand, what is their requirements. It's important for them to know what side effects do we know to date. We're obliged to report and to make sure those patients are aware of what is known to date with the vaccine data that we have. When we talked about the different phases, as we continue to develop, we begin to learn more, and we begin to learn more about what are those side effects, and we really want to disclose what those are. We also want to know, we let them know, how is the vaccine made? Anything that it's important for their patients to have several questions, and we need to make sure as researchers that we provide those answers to those questions.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else anybody wants to add?
Well, right now, every vaccine is the risk and the benefit. Right now, we're in a stage 3 where we're thinking that the benefit is large and the risk is low. That's different from at the beginning of the research, where basically stage 1, where we were saying, well, the risk is high and the benefits are probably low, but everything that we do has a risk, okay? So, but there is a lot of things that needs to be said. For example, I always do this exercise when I have my patient and they ask me about a side effect. So I always ask them, okay, so let's imagine that I have never been on a car. So what would be the side effects that you would describe riding a car with me? So you would say you can have a flat tire, you can run out of gas, you can have a car crash, or basically the engine can explode for no good reason, right? So could this thing happen? Yes, they can. Can you guarantee that they're not going to happen to me? No, I cannot. Are they likely to happen? And the short answer would be no. When you need like something to fill your fridge, you just go into your car, you go to the grocery store, you don't even think about that. Your chances of dying in a car crash, according to the New York Times, is 1 in 103, which is much worse than the vaccines. However, you do that, and basically if you have an issue with your car, then you deal with that at that moment. And the side effects with the vaccines are exactly the same. It's all about the risks and the benefits. And vaccines are extremely safe. And yes, there are people who have side effects, but the vast majority of them, they don't have any side effects, or they have like a soreness after a shot, which is expected, and they basically move on with their lives. That's what I have seen with the vast majority of all my patients.
Great. Thank you for that. That's certainly what people needed to hear.
I can speak up on that as well.
Thank you.
Because I've gotten the vaccine shot recently. Just on Friday, I got the second dose, and on Saturday my arm was sore, and on Sunday my arm was still sore. Today my arm is great, so it's fine. And same thing happened the first time. Arm soreness and like a little bit of a headache, and then a couple days later you're perfectly fine. So, which is typical with flu vaccine too. So if you've ever gotten a flu shot, it's very similar.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That doesn't sound super scary, does it? So I'd like to just remind those who are joining us via Facebook Live or YouTube that you can put your questions in the chat. A little bit later, we're going to entertain those questions. So feel free to add those questions now or get ready to add them in a few minutes. So one of the things that I wonder about, and we talked a little bit about whether the vaccine is just for adults, is who should get the vaccine? Are there certain people demographically, or are there certain people because of their health conditions who should or should not participate in a vaccine trial? Let me pose this question to Dr. Matthews and Dr. Causey.
Well, I don't know if I could say who should or should not participate in trials, but I can say that I think it's important for us to have a diversity of people who participate in all types of research, especially these trials. But that's also not to say that we're trying to force anyone to participate in any research. I think that the reason why, because the question I get a lot, and as a sociologist, I think this is an important point. The question I get a lot is, if there's no difference between a Black and white person or a Black, white, and Latinx person based on race, there's no real, race is a social construct, and there's no real like genetic difference between us. We're all humans. So why does it matter? Well, it matters because even though race as a DNA, as there's no racial difference by DNA, there are racial differences in our lived experiences. And because of the racism that that has happened and impacted our lives, we have been exposed to environmental stressors, environmental hazards. We've experienced stress in different ways that have manifested in our bodies. We have underlying health conditions that impact our health and make us vulnerable to COVID-19, as well as almost every other health condition you can ever imagine. And so in order for us to develop a medication that works for populations like ours who have a host of other health issues, it's important for us to be represented in the research. And so then that also helps us to think about who should be represented, why are we, who's eligible to participate? Yes, people who have underlying health conditions, people who are older adults, people who are, frontline workers, healthcare workers, people who are at the highest risk for COVID-19. At this point, because we're in phase 3, we're trying to see, it's already been studied in 600 humans. They found it to be safe and to produce an immune response. Now we want to see, how does this affect, and how effective is it in populations that have diverse health experiences like ours? So that's kind of a long answer to address this kind of need for diversity.
Well, thank you for your answer. I'm going to go to Dr. Causey with a very similar question. For the same reasons that
Can I
Dr.
piggyback?
Matthews shared, I have a question in front of me saying, why is it important for racial or ethnic minorities to learn more about and participate in vaccine trials? So what would you like to add, Dr. Causey?
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Okay, let me repeat it. Why is it important?
Thank you.
Okay, why is it important for,
You said, why is it important? Well, to add on to,
okay, good.
I heard you. I'm sorry, my connection is a little poor. But I wanted to add on to Dr. Matthews' comment about the importance of adequate representation. And I wanted to add to that, it's important because we do want to address health and equity, but I also think it's important that when we talk about the efficacy of this vaccine, it's important for us to have adequate representation from diverse experiences, not only with regard to treatment for COVID, but also we want to know what types of promotive factors that people have that are helping them build resilience towards this COVID-19 disease. So those different environmental contexts that people are living in may also be sources of, may also lend to different sources of social capital that help people recover in a better way. That may not necessarily be linked to their medical histories or genetic profiles. There may be resources in their community that make their outcomes better that are not necessarily tied to their medical histories. And I think those types of knowledge are important as well when we're talking about not just prevention, but also recovery and sustaining for long-term healthy outcomes. So what resources are these people able to access through others? That could be familial support, that could be economic support, that could be proximity to healthcare clinics. What things are available to them that improve their outcomes, not just closing the gap with the treatment of the vaccine. That's important to know as well.
Thank you very much. When it comes to vaccines, a lot of people know history. And in history, there have been some challenges, there have been some problems, and there have been some bad people who did bad things. So do any of the conspiracy theories that are floating around about vaccines being a part of the eugenics project, for example, have any validity? Anybody who dares is welcome to respond to that question.
Well, I will say I know a lot about those research abuses. I actually talk about those a lot in my research methods class, and the students are aware of what happened with the Tuskegee syphilis study. And a lot of the research protections that we have today, the institutional review boards and a lot of the internal auditors and external auditors and things like that, are because of the exposure of those past things that occurred before. So to keep it short, we're not making the same mistakes, or the researchers are not making the same mistakes. And they have to be a lot more transparent with what they're going to do. And there are people overseeing the research who are not affiliated with the university, who don't get any kind of financial compensation. And there's, so we're not making the same mistakes, or researchers are not making the same mistakes that they made in the past. That's why I felt comfortable signing up and taking the vaccine.
Okay, thank you. Who else wants to address the conspiracy theories that are out there that would make people caution or decide to completely turn their back on the opportunity to participate in a vaccine trial?
I'll speak a little bit on that. That also is a lot of the work that I do, and I focus on. I've heard a lot of conspiracy theories even since the COVID-19 has hit, and a lot of it I think is reminiscent of HIV conspiracy theories. We hear about false cures. We hear about people claiming that they've been, cured of COVID-19, and we hear about people's concerns that COVID-19, just like HIV, was purposefully put into minority communities to wipe us out, and I think some of those concerns are rooted in real and kind of valid concerns, like valid historical things that have happened, things that, it doesn't just come out of thin air. And so I think we need to really pay attention to why those conspiracy theories and why those fears have come up. It has to do with we have to be very open and transparent and intentional about addressing the systematic inequality that is the foundation of this country, and then how that has translated into scientific abuse and exploitation. If we don't do that, then we will never really be able to move the needle forward in addressing health disparities and in promoting equity. And so I think what I'd have to, give people on this panel kudos for really thinking about that, and also just trying to think about how can we do that in a local context. We can't fix everything that's happening across the world, right? We can't fix health inequity even in this whole country, but what we can do is think about what's happening in North Carolina. And how can we address barriers to care? How can we increase access to transportation? How can we improve access to employment that then helps produce, healthcare coverage? All of those things contribute to this mistrust, right? And then historical kind of, examples that contribute to our thought that a vaccine trial would repeat Henrietta Lacks or repeat syphilis study, when really this is an opportunity, I think, for communities, organizations, community leaders to have a voice in how this is being done in our communities, and making sure that we benefit from it, not only scientifically, but we are a part of the decision-making process, that we are the minority businesses that are printing out the flyers, that we're the businesses that are helping create opportunity for the community. So I think that's kind of, I'm answering multiple things at once, but yeah.
We're going to continue this conversation because we need to talk a little bit more about what you just said. Thank you for sharing that. But let me introduce one more special guest that we have. We're glad to have Mr. Anthony Hamilton join us. Many of you know him as a Grammy Award-winning singer, songwriter, producer, and actor. He's also a native North Carolinian, and he has some thoughts that would contribute to this conversation as well. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So from your perspective, what are some of the considerations that we all need to take into consideration for African American and Latinx communities in order for us to build trust with regard to the COVID-19 vaccines?
Well, like you said, it goes back, way back, back when the Tuskegee Airmen and all that stuff, when they were using us for example, guinea pigs to use all these vaccines and things over the years. And it comes back later that we were just guinea pigs, and they were injecting us with so much disease. I think since then we've never trusted people in healthcare or anything. So I think it's going to take more people to look like us who can genuinely have conversations with us to ensure us that what we're doing now is different from what they did before. I think having someone that looks like me will give me a little bit more comfort when it comes to going to the doctor and trusting them. Having someone from the Latino community to sit down with some people, our brown brothers, to ensure them that the same things won't happen again. And we have to build that trust from the grassroots and from one patient to another, doctor-patient communication, and allowing us to know what we're putting in our bodies. I think a lot of times when we go to the doctor, we're just there. We don't really understand what we're being injected with. I don't think we understand the whole scope of medicine as a whole. And I think that would bring some comfort to us as well. But I think it's going to take a lot to rebuild that trust. Even myself, going to the doctor now, I'm a little leery. I have a brother, Dr. Ken Redcross, who I trust a lot. He gives me the data and gives me information on certain drugs and vitamins and things of that nature. So it allows me to feel more comfortable with going to the doctor. I think even not having insurance that covers those things, I think people opt out of going to the doctor for fear of not being able to afford it. Healthcare should be something that everyone has access to, and until then, that will be secondary to a lot of things when it comes to dealing with money, because people feel like I can self-medicate, or I'll use grandma's old remedies, and sometimes that doesn't work out. So I think all those factors has a lot to do with the trust, and the comfort of trusting doctors and healthcare physicians.
All of those points are so valid. Again, we're so thankful that you were able to join us this evening. I wanted to let you know that one of our panelists is actually in the COVID-19 vaccine trial. That's Richard Moya, who will be on the screen in just a moment, because I'm going to ask you to ask him a question.
I surely will.
Now, I don't know if you've met anybody else who's in a trial. So now that you have the opportunity to speak directly to somebody who's in a trial, what questions might you have of him?
What are the real side effects of these drugs? What exactly is it? Is it more natural? Is it a natural base? Is it something that's just just something? How toxic is it? Is it something that's just? Is it anything from the earth? Is it anything natural in it at all? What are the main ingredients in this, and what are the real risks? And how long has this thing been studied? I think a lot of times people feel like they may have a vaccine, but not enough time to really see what the effects are. And then once again, we're guinea pigs, and 3 months later, our ears are falling off. So just want to make sure that they have knowledge of what it is that they're giving us.
So I can answer some of those questions as somebody who's taken the vaccine. When I went in a few weeks ago for the first dose, my wife and I were the number 360th and 361st people to get that vaccine. And
you still have your ears, so okay.
Yes, and I still have my ears. I'm feeling great, honestly. So the day after the shot, my arm was sore, right? So if you're doing some motions like that, it hurt, but then it was fine. So the arms is fine. It's just feels like a flu shot, and had a little bit of a headache after that as well. And again, that went away a day or two later. So I don't think there are any long-term side effects, but because it's a new thing, they're following us for up to a year. So they're asking us questions every week. Do you have any symptoms? How are you feeling today? All those kinds of questions to make sure. And so And it's also definitely not just the African American community. If we are, those of us who volunteered to be guinea pigs this time, it's all kinds of people. One of the people who drove in, the nurse who was administering the drug to me, also got somebody in from Virginia who was 87 years old. They weren't doing a trial by her. So she wanted to come to Winston just so she could get access to it. So I hope that puts your mind just a little bit more at ease about as far as who's taking it and what the side effects are.
Yeah. That helps out. I know my bass player had it pretty bad. He didn't have to take the vaccine. Just kind of allowed his body to do what it had to do. But he was pretty bad off. He was almost out of here. We almost lost him. But he's doing well now. And to have someone that close to me, we played together for about 12, 13 years. So to have someone, close to me that's sick, to see him in that much discomfort, it was very, very much eye-opening.
Mr. Hamilton, I think Dr. Sanders also can help answer some of those questions that you had.
Yeah. Well, in terms of COVID itself, what exactly, I know it has an effect on your respiratory, but what is the exact effect it has on the lungs and the respiratory? What exactly is it doing? Is it hardening your lungs? What exactly is it? I know a lot of people don't really know exactly what COVID is because we've been told so many different things. It's like the flu. It's the flu. It's not the flu. It's a bionic flu. So what exactly is COVID?
Thanks. I think that's a great question. And I want to start off by saying, in all honesty, we don't know all that it does.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason that it's so important that we continue doing research to figure it out.
Yeah.
And to figure out, does it do something different depending on whether or not you've got high blood pressure, or whether or not you've got heart disease or kidney disease. So I think that these are really important basic questions that we're learning more about, but we don't have all the answers yet. But what it is basically is COVID is caused by a virus called SARS-CoV-2, which is just a new type of coronavirus. And there are coronaviruses that spread in every species of every animal. There are a few coronaviruses that were already spreading in people. And for most of us, when we get those other coronaviruses, it just causes a cold. The other coronaviruses account for about half of the colds that we get every cold and flu season.
Never knew
but
that.
in some people, especially the elderly or people who have other underlying problems, when they get those other coronaviruses, sometimes it causes pneumonia and can even be fatal. So this new SARS-CoV-2, this new coronavirus, it's not a new virus. It was just spreading in other animals. We're pretty sure that it was spreading mainly in bats, and it hopped from bats, maybe through some other animals, but it hopped from bats into people. And so it's new for us, but it's not new in nature. Unfortunately, we don't have any immunity to it. So right now we're all getting it it's spreading pretty rapidly around the world. And just like with those other viruses, for some of us, it doesn't cause many symptoms at all. For some of us, it causes just a cold. And for some of us, it can cause a severe pneumonia or even be fatal. And really to your very insightful question about, what is it doing exactly? Well, for those of us who it's just causing a cold, we think that it's, we're getting it, we get a little bit of inflammation, but our body is able to fight it off. And for those of us who are getting really sick, we think one of two things is mainly happening. Either our immune system is not strong enough to fight it off, and so we get too much virus in our body, or we actually have such a strong immune reaction because we've never seen this virus before. So our body's not prepared for it. And so we get such a strong reaction against it that we get too much inflammation. And that too much inflammation can sometimes cause our lungs to fill up, or for us to have other problems in our heart or our blood vessels. So I think that was a great question. I hope I answered it as honestly and clearly as and I Mr. Younger, if you would allow me, I'm going to make a plug to say, Dr. Matthews, Mr. Younger, we're all also involved in another study that's not about giving vaccines, but it's about answering these questions. Just trying to get people to volunteer, to have their antibodies checked, to record symptoms, to help track with us their electronic health record, so that we can answer exactly those sort of questions. What is happening when we get COVID? And can we figure out why our African American community has been more hard hit than other parts of the community? Is that just because of the social demographics, or is there something else happening, like kidney disease?
We got enough going on. We don't need one more.
That's right. So I will stop answering, but thanks for asking such a great question, because I think that is really key to us trying to go into all of these research questions.
Another question is vitamin D. I know my doctor speaks highly on vitamin D when pertaining to COVID. Is that pretty accurate to stay up on your vitamin D? I know I take prebiotics and probiotics, and I've been turning my friends on. But is vitamin D just extremely helpful?
Dr. Nassim, do you want to answer that one?
Yes, the short answer would be we don't know. There is a lot of research going on. But right now, there is nothing that will prevent you from having COVID. There is a lot of talk about zinc. There was a talk with vitamin D. In South America, there's a lot of talk about ivermectin. In March, it was hydroxychloroquine. The short answer is there's nothing that you can take right now that we can say to the community, take this, you're not going to get COVID. Yeah. There is a lot of research. Vitamin D is good for a lot of other reasons. So if your doctor said that you should take it, by all means, do it. Does it care for COVID? I don't know. Okay. Now, going back to your question regarding is this worse the flu or not? So I would like to give 2 cents too. So the difference with the COVID and the flu is it's much worse than the flu. Okay, in the number of cases that we're having, the amount of deaths that we're having. And at the beginning, we didn't think about that. I'm on record in March saying that the flu was much worse than COVID. But as you can see, I was wrong. One. And two is there is a treatment now for the flu called oseltamivir. And currently, the treatment for the COVID are all experimental. Nothing has been formally approved in the US. And we have vaccines to prevent the flu, which we still don't have the vaccines to prevent the COVID. And as Dr. Sanders was saying, is what is scary about COVID is the vast majority of us, when we're exposed to this virus, we're going to have no symptoms at all. You can have COVID right now, and I couldn't tell you. I could have COVID, and you couldn't tell. The majority of people will be no symptom, minor symptoms like a common cold, and there will be a percentage who will crash, being hospitalized, and from that percentage, there will be a percentage who will crash, hospitalized, and die. The issue is every time you're exposed to the virus, you play Russian roulette, and you don't know what category you're going to be, and nobody knows which category you're going to be. And that's what makes the virus different is there's a lot of variety of how a body can respond because everyone is different. Why that happened, there is a lot of talk also in the medical community, but the short answer is if I get exposed to COVID, you don't know if I'm going to be the one who has no symptoms, mild symptoms, or who's going to be hospitalized and die from this. Yeah. Doctors, we are bound by a code named HIPAA, which about the privacy of the patient. So we cannot tell you a lot of the things that happens to us and the things that we have been seeing since the beginning of the pandemic. but I have seen like very bad cases. I have seen people dying from this, and I have seen families being wiped out.
Okay. Another question. I'm a father. I have 6 sons, from 31, 29, 23. My twins are 10 and an 8-year-old. So in the beginning, I know they were saying that young kids, toddlers and young kids can't catch COVID. Is that a myth?
Dr. Sanders, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'll be happy to try. So again, great question, especially as we're talking about trying to get kids back in school and moving to education. So it is, I would say it's definitely a myth to say kids cannot get infected. We are seeing kids get infected, but it seems to be true. Lots of data in the United States, lots of data in Europe and Asia, all very consistent, saying that children, usually we're talking about children under the age of 10 or 12, even though they may get infected, they don't seem to get very sick. Most of the time, it's a much milder infection in children. I think the key there is 2 things. One, there are going to be exceptions. We are going to hear about tragedies, about tragic cases of young people, of teenagers, of college-age students. But all of those, from a percentage-wise, it's a very, very small percentage of young children or teenagers. Around the age of 10 or 12, the symptoms start to increase. And then by the time somebody's a late teenager, they are, pretty much like an adult in terms of getting infected and having some symptoms, which could range from very mild to, potentially severe. But overall, for your kids, the ages that you listed, overall, I'm frankly not very worried about them. I don't want them to get infected, but there's a good chance there's a good chance that we're all going to get infected. My daughter, my son-in-law have just gotten over this last week. There is a good chance that many of us will get infected. Your children's ages, statistically, they will do very, very well.
Okay.
It's really, as we get older and as we develop other health problems, where I get more and more worried about people.
Okay.
And ask a related question that somebody shared from either Facebook or YouTube, and it has to do with the schools opening back up soon. As a parent, I'm interested in knowing what the panel has to say to parents like her to ease the decision about letting the children go back, as we feel mental health is becoming more important in keeping them home to lower the chances of getting the virus.
It's a great question.
So, Alan, can I go first, and then I am happy to be corrected. I will say that Dr. Matthews never hesitates to correct me, and I invite her to do so here as well. I understand people's great concern, people's great anxiety about having their children potentially return to school. There is a significant risk that they will get infected. There's a significant risk that they could bring it home to other family members. And I think that we all have to look at our own families, our own family dynamics. Who is taking care of the children outside of school? Is that an elderly grandparent or an elderly neighbor? And really assess that risk. But as I mentioned a minute ago, most children are going to do extremely well, even if they get infected. And I have to say that I am increasingly concerned about the mental health, the educational impact, the nutritional impact on keeping our children, especially our children from minority communities and our children who may be socioeconomically disadvantaged. I am extremely worried about the long-term consequences for them of not being in school, of not getting the education and the social support that they so desperately need.
Mhm.
And you know, I understand the anxiety about sending kids back to school. I just want to say that I, like the American Academy of Pediatrics, have even more anxiety about what we're depriving our children by keeping them out of school.
Mm.
Would anybody else like
I'm gonna-
to add to that?
Can I jump in since you mentioned my name, Dr. Seuss? You know, I think so. I have two young cousins who live in Winston-Salem, and one of them also is has autism. And so I think, to your point, it's, you know, a lot of times we don't think about, you know, just the spectrum of children have a variety of, you know, considerations that parents are not equipped to handle on their own. And so what I have seen, and I think this is modeled after some like African cultural norms, you know, about educating your children in pod. And so I've seen some people do that where they all kind of agree to quarantine or follow certain precautions together, and then only keep their kids around each other. And then they've even started hiring, I've seen people start hiring teachers, tutors to come in and teach the kids together. So, I mean, in the meantime, you know, if people are still afraid to send their children to school, there are ways that we can be creative about addressing those mental health issues or challenges while also keeping safe.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anybody else who wants to chime in before we go to the next question?
I want to chime in. I think that those are great ideas and support systems for families that have the means. I do that with regard to make individual type of assessment and is a hard decision because we have different learning styles and different learning needs. And also, I think in recognizing that, it's also important to recognize that children are resilient. So to have to assess the risk of sending your child to school when, I can't remember the exact percentage, but I remember seeing a statistic that said of the children who have the poor outcomes and high morbidity, it was, I believe, over 70, someone correct me if I'm wrong, about 70% of the COVID-19 child deaths were children of color. So I do think it's important to note that when families and parents to make these decisions about what's best for them, to acknowledge that if you are a parent of color, then the risk is going to be higher, and we have statistics to support that. And also, by sending a child to school and them coming back home, if you are at a disproportionate because of other comorbid illness, that is something you have to take into account. But with all that being said, I think what the bigger implication at play is how do we support families that are being forced to make a decision that may not be in the best interest of their family, right? When we talk about economic support. So maybe I'm sending my child to school because I can't afford childcare. Or maybe my child does need extra educational support, but I don't have money to contribute to a pod to commune with other families and other children. So, there are big work on different macro levels. We can have financial support to these families so that children are not left behind just because they have lower socioeconomic status, and that's going to be necessary when we think about the long-term development or outcomes of these children who are kind of just trying to feel their way through the process, and with parents that are struggling to make it work the best way that they know how with very limited resources.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mr. Younger, do you mind if I follow up on that? Because I think those were important points, and I just want to say that it is your memory was spot on. It so far in pediatric deaths, which the CDC is counting all the way up to age 21. So I'll leave it to you to decide whether somebody 18 to 21 is a pediatric patient or not. But these statistics count up to age 21. 78% of the deaths in that age group have been among minorities, especially among African Americans. So you're absolutely right that it's disproportionately in mortality has affected that. But in the United States, the most recent numbers in that age category, so we've had over 200,000 deaths, only 100 deaths in that age category, which means that during the COVID epidemic, we have lost fewer children up to the age of 21 to COVID than we have to homicide, suicide, drug overdose, drowning, and home accidents. And so I totally agree with you. There has been a disproportionate impact. I just want to make sure that we're keeping it in perspective and recognizing that all those mental health and social health issues are also disproportionately affecting our African American community.
Thank you very much for illustrating those points. Let me encourage our audience in Facebook Live and YouTube to ask your questions of Mr. Hamilton in particular while we have him with us for a few more minutes. Also, while you're doing that, I wanted to give a special shout out to my students at Winston-Salem State who are part of the healthcare management program. They are future leaders in healthcare, and many of these issues that we're talking about are directly related to the work that they're going to be pursuing. So I wanted to applaud them for joining us. Another question that we have from the audience has to do with affordability. How do we make sure that once a vaccine is developed and available, that people can afford it? Who dares answer that question?
I think that's all of our roles. I think that I'm a clinical researcher by trade, and I'm working on the development side of things. But when we start to think about manufacturing and distribution, this is a big deal, and we're in a public health crisis. And I think that we need to have more forums such as this, more town halls, more people speaking out loud. The governments are going to be involved, NGOs are going to be involved, and I mean, everybody has to come together as a voice, because this is something where we have to make sure that from a distribution perspective, it gets done and it gets done right. And we need to have the we need to have the voice of the right people speaking for those that are underserved, because we're not going to get a second chance to get it right. And this is pretty significant on a not only on a national scale, but a global scale.
Yeah.
Thank you. Healthcare costs seem like they continue to rise, and a lot of people believe that once we do have a vaccine, it's going to be out of the market. It's going to be priced out of the market for a lot of the people who are going to need it. Anything else that we can do to make sure that?
Well, the expectation that I have been reading before coming to the talk was that the vaccine was going to cost $40 and that that's what it has been said to us, and for the public, and that there will be millions of Americans who will get the vaccine, like through the government or through the HMOs.
So I want to chime in here and also say that, and I agree with Daisy on this point. Historically, we just think about HIV as the example. That's the most recent pandemic that we've had, and that was in the 80s. There were people in the community in the streets fighting for research, fighting for clinical research to develop medications to treat HIV. And they were also fighting in the streets, marching in the streets to make sure that medication was affordable and accessible to the public. And I think that we need to still have that happening today. Community members should be involved they should email Dr. Sanders. I always say that every time. Email, vote. Make sure you vote for politicians who are going to push forward the agenda to make sure that we have coverage of medical coverage, also especially for uninsured people, because uninsured people are the most likely to be at the highest risk. Vote for candidates who are going to expand Medicaid, right? Those kinds of things, tangible things that we can do as community members. A lot of times we feel like we don't have a voice in how that's happening, but we do, and it's our vote.
Okay, let me see if I can grab another question, and you alluded to it a little bit, Dr. Matthews. How are researchers engaging the HIV community as it pertains to the research study? Is it a myth that some HIV medications may help in preventing the coronavirus? Who would like to respond to that?
It looks like Dr. Nassim is going to beat me to it. So go ahead, Julio.
Oh, sorry, Dr. Sanders. It's like I was saying is like the two things. Number one is how do we engage people with HIV? We have the HIV clinic on Janeway in the 7th tower. There is a specific criteria for the vaccine that we're working now. You have to have more than 350 CD4 counts. That's the amount of cell that you need to have, and you have to have a low amount of virus, what we call viral load. That is the inclusion criteria that we're now looking in the COVID vaccine for Moderna. But we're actively engaging. Whenever I have a patient in my HIV clinic, I always try to said if they are interested on the vaccine, and we have put posters in the clinic, and we're actively not only it's not a contraindication to be to have HIV, provided those two parameters are met. It's something that we actually want to know. We want to see if the vaccine actually works in the HIV community. And the second thing is regarding the medication is there was a specific medication. I'm not going to tell the brand name, but it's a combination of ritonavir and lopinavir, which it was looking great in the lab, in vitro, what we call. So in the lab was looking great. So there was a moment at the beginning of the pandemic when we didn't know much about COVID that actually was making sense, and it was actually having a limited use. But later on, there were more trials, and it showed that it was great in vitro, meaning in the lab, but not in vivo, meaning in the humans. So that specific combination, we don't use it, and there is no medication for the HIV that is being used for COVID.
We have had a wonderful town hall discussion. Thank all of you for joining us. I want to see if we have any last words, and when I say last words, I mean a minute or less, except for you, Mr. Hamilton. You can speak all that you would like. We'll start with you.
Just speaking freely.
Yes, whatever you'd like to say.
Yeah, well, thank you all.
Our discussion.
Yeah, thank you all for having this platform and inviting me and getting, information out to the people. And, it's very helpful. I have a better understanding, a little bit more trust in terms of if it comes to a point where I have to, consider the vaccine for me and my family. So that's been more confident. But yeah, just thank you all and continue to do great work. And we appreciate you guys and all your hard work and effort and putting yourself on the line. And prayers are with you guys and appreciate you. And yeah.
Well, thank you again for joining us. Daisy?
Sure. I'd like to echo what Mr. Hamilton just said. It's been an honor to be a part of this group. And I think that all of us need to continue to work with a sense of urgency to get a vaccine And my employees have heard me say this, very rarely in our lifetime are we going to get to, or we're working on something that's going to touch every single person on this planet, and we need to do it. We need to act with a sense of urgency, and we need to make sure that we have diversification on these projects to make sure that we reach the right population when these are approved and they're distributed on a global scale.
Very well said. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Causey?
Oh, I'm hoping that people who maybe were unsure or feeling anxious about where we're heading with the vaccine and their participation are feeling more relieved after hearing some input and some honest feedback from the professionals that took part in the town hall today. And even for those who still may be unsure, I'm hoping that the need for adequate representation and that appeals to communities of color, because for once, as Dr. Matthews said earlier, we have, and part of treatment to close this gap that we are seeing in the disproportionate effect people leave from this more to participate so that we can move forward together.
Well, thank you very much. Dr. Moya, what are your final comments?
It'd be great if you are willing to sign up for the vaccine. It's going to be a great benefit to your community. But in the meantime, before they're done with all the trials, please keep wearing a mask and social distancing.
Thank you very much. Dr. Sanders. Oh, you're muted. I'm sure you're saying something brilliant, though.
Well, you know better than that, but I am sharing my gratitude for being included in this discussion. I really appreciate all that each of you is doing to try to help everybody throughout our community to stay well, and so thank you all. I do want to say I believe that the distrust for research among especially our African American community is well-founded. I don't for a second want to dismiss the things that have gone on before and that have led to this level of concern. And it's totally reasonable. I do want to thank Dr. Moya and all the others who have volunteered, who are willing to try to look past that, to help make sure that we have good representation and that we're doing things right. So thank you very much. And thanks again for including me.
Thank you. Dr. Nassim. You're on mute as well.
Wait, can you hear me now?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. And I think it's really important that we continue to do these town halls and address the concerns that we already have. There are two concerns that they haven't been brought up that I would like to bring myself. One is something that we always get is, could you get it yourself? And the short answer is absolutely yes, actually. But the issue is we couldn't get it because when you are a researcher, you cannot be a volunteer at the same time. But what we have done is we went to the highest official of Wake Forest and we recruit them. And I'm planning to recruit my mother as soon as I can. She's coming from Argentina next month. Second thing is, how much money do we make from the vaccine? Well, Dr. Sanders and I, we make $0. We are not being paid by the pharmaceutical companies. We get paid by Wake Forest. We have no shares in the pharmaceutical companies at all. So basically, I want to be very transparent, and something that I think that people should know. The other thing is, if anyone is interested in participating in the COVID-19 vaccine, is you can type COVID-19 vaccine study at wakehealth.edu and send an email. And we're still recruiting until the end of the week. And we will gladly talk to you, and we will show you the lab, and we will explain as many times as necessary, because we have nothing to hide. This is important. You have an opportunity to be part of history. What we do now with the COVID is going to resonate in time. So I want to be clear that in 50 years from now, when you look back at this time and you look at your children and they ask you, what did you do during the COVID pandemic? You can say to them, I helped to develop the vaccine that you are probably getting or not. But basically, you have an opportunity to be part of history. Please help us to help you.
Thank you.
So
very much.
Dr. Nassim brought up money, and I didn't mention it earlier, but since he mentioned it, volunteers do get paid. I've already gotten a gift card. So I wouldn't suggest that you do it for that reason, but that's a benefit to you as well.
That's right. Well, thank you. Thank you. And Dr. Matthews, what are your final comments?
I just thank you all for joining this panel discussion, and I'm hoping that this helps address some questions. Obviously, we were not able to get to all of the questions that were posed in Facebook and YouTube, and so we will continue to host town hall discussions and make sure that this information is accessible to people. I want to also let you all know that the Maya Angelou Center for Health Equity does provide a lot of, we're hosting this town hall as well as creating educational materials. We're out in the community. We partner with, I want to give thanks to our partners, community partners, including Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, which is my sorority. I want to thank Hustle Winston-Salem, the Hispanic League, the 20 for Forsyth County Department of Public Health, and also thank the Wake Forest School of Medicine, as well as Javara Research. Just want to thank all of our partners. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton, for joining me. Really appreciate it. I've enjoyed many of your concerts in person, so it's great to see you again. And if you want to learn more information, don't hesitate to email us or follow us on Facebook or YouTube for additional resources. You can email us mache@wakehealth.edu.
Thank you very much. Also want to thank the 20 for participating not only today, but since June, they've been involved in this. So thank all of you for joining us this evening. I have no doubt that you learned a lot, because I know I've learned a lot. We want to continue to learn together and solve the problems that we face. Everyone have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.